The first song that you sang just now, He Shall Redeem You, it's part of the oratorio that Swami Kriyananda wrote about the life of Christ. It's not usually what we sing on Christmas morning. We're not usually thinking about being redeemed from sin, but we ought to be. And I don't mean this in the traditional going to hell sort of way at all, because sin is not really something imposed upon us from the outside. It's not somebody else's opinion. It's an actual experience that we have. And the experience that we have is that we know we could have more joy than we have now. And we go out and try to find it in one way or another. And we are given the free will by God to do that. That's the distinguishing characteristic of being a human being, as separate from all the other stages of incarnation that come before. The way Swami describes the process of incarnation, reincarnation, even through the animal stages, he has a very interesting way of saying it. He said, we manifest the body that is capable of expressing the full level of consciousness that we're on. So a lizard, for example, has many fewer opportunities than a domestic dog or a horse. And a bird can do things that many other creatures can't do, but it doesn't have hands, it doesn't have arms, it lacks certain things. And so we experience to the fullest extent possible every level of consciousness with the body that we have. And then when we have learned everything that that body can teach us, we get to go on to another one. And thus souls move through the animal world. And that doesn't mean you get to change species every incarnation, until we get to the point where we have sufficient self-awareness, passage through dim corridors of consciousness. The purpose of life is self-awareness, and with life's birth, the dawn of self-awareness. And when we reach a certain point of self-awareness, we need a body, a human body, to be able to express the full potential. We've used up all lesser kinds of forms. And the reason in the Bible that it says man shall have dominion over the creatures is not speaking that we're so good, but that the human body has the capacity to perceive infinity. The human nervous system is subtle enough that we can live in it and live in the infinite simultaneously. This is what it is when the great saints and the great avatars, the masters like Jesus, come. They live in a human body and simultaneously can experience the infinite. And that's where we're all heading. But the necessary priority of experience that brings that to us cannot be imposed from the outside. The way God made us, and I don't know why he did it, but this is how he did it. The way God made us, we get to choose. So we come into the human body, and all of a sudden, we have so many options. We have hands, we have feet, we have voice, we have feelings, we have willpower, we have appetites, we have choices, really have choices, far beyond any other body that we had. And so we get to find out. Master uses the wonderful phrase that human life is here for our education and entertainment. That's the phrase he uses. Very often one feels neither entertained nor educated, but the hope is always there. And once we have free will and begin to get to choose, we can just wander around in confusion, well, for a really long time. And we just keep trying, and we try this, and we try that. And Master also said, which was so interesting, he said the reason we incarnate is because human life almost works. If it didn't work at all, we'd reject it completely very quickly. But it almost works. There's so much that's so beautiful and so heartwarming, and there's so much promise, and there's so much hope. And we spend such a long time trying to make it work. And then once we've committed ourselves, we're so reluctant to admit that it didn't. And then we have to go through all of that again. And I don't just mean, who we marry and the choice of career and whether our children live up to our expectations and whether money really brings happiness or whether we can really eat nothing but chocolate and still be healthy. These are all questions. Whether drinking and drugs really work. We just get to try all these things. And we're here to be entertained because we're drawn to that which feels positive and to be educated as to the consequences of our decisions. And so after a very long time, a very, very long time, probably repeating more than that, we gradually begin to get the pattern. Somebody, not me, I won't take credit, but it's very clever, said life is the only game where the goal of the game is to learn the rules. And that's really what we're trying to do, aren't we? And it's the rules of happiness and suffering. But there's a game changer in the whole story, which is completely different, which is every so often, by the grace of the same God who made us, he sends somebody who understands perfectly how this game is done. Someone who lives among us as one of us, who has a human body that looks very much like the human body we have. I was sitting once in a restaurant with a friend of mine, and for some reason the atmosphere in the restaurant, even though that particular night, because we'd been there before, it just somehow the atmosphere was very dissonant with our own vibration. And I remarked to her, if we actually looked physically as different as we are in our attitudes toward life, I said, we would look like alien species and everyone in here would start screaming and running away. Because we were not living according to the same rules anymore. The first way, and this is what we talk about in the Festival of Light, which you'll hear in just a few minutes, the bird going out for the first time becomes enamored of his own strength and begins to enjoy the personal power of it. And it's not just an adolescent stage. Many of the people who run the world right now are young birds who are enamored of their own strength. And what else is wisdom if not to get more and then keep what I get for myself? Whereas our divine guidance is that we are part of a greater reality, and we live in an interwoven fabric in relationship to all of creation, and even the sparrow is noted by God. When the sparrow falls, the divine knows, and every action that we take is a ripple that goes out literally through all of creation. Quite a responsibility, isn't it? But every so often, one of these souls, avatars, who do not need to be educated anymore, who are just like us, only they've finished the race. They've finished. They've understood, I am a part of all that is, and every thought, every action, every decision, every expression of energy can be in harmony with where our true happiness lies, which paradoxically is not what it seems. It's not, why not keep what is mine for myself? It's realizing that that very myself is one with everything. And this is why here we are on Christmas Day, centuries and centuries and centuries after this little baby was born in a stable. And nobody noticed. I mean, nobody in the sense of nobody who was important, who was in charge, although King Herod was a little nervous about him because he'd heard some prophecies that told him that maybe someone was going to injure him. And so he decided to act upon it by killing all the small babies, which was not the best decision on his part. First of all, it didn't work, and it was not going to be happiness producing for him, because that child and those who were destined to be governing him had understood there was a destiny, and he came to tell us. And we use the word redeem. He redeems us. He can redeem you. Walk by his side. Well, how can we walk by the side of a baby who can't even walk? How can we walk by the side of someone who was crucified and died centuries and centuries ago? We have to be talking about something so much deeper and so much more subtle, and something that is untouched by time, space, or death. What is it that makes our lives so confusing? Time passes, old age comes, the body that we celebrate changes in certain ways. The people that we cling to for one reason or another become different than we want them to be. It almost works. And so we try again. We're just going to set it up with a whole different set of players. I'm just going to put a few different places in pieces in place. I'm going to be taller and stronger and richer and more powerful. I'm going to see if that works. And it almost works. It works for a while. But then a few things go wrong. So I do it again, and I do it again, and I do it again. And then what happens is what Yogananda beautifully calls anguishing monotony. It's just a brilliant use of English language. Anguishing monotony. It's not even tragic. It's just exhausting. It's just exhausting. And then what happens is the consciousness of one of these avatars just passes through. Either we're born in a time, Yogananda was an avatar, we're born close enough to his life that we can know people who knew him, and then we'll know people who knew him. And it'll go for a while. But that's not really, it's not the dynasty of generations that gives us the power. It's the capacity of these masters to transcend time and space. Space, meaning the master is as close to us now as he would have been if we were standing next to his body with his arms around us. The physical body is the smallest expression, and I don't just mean because now we're celebrating the baby. It's just the tiniest little window through which this infinity of power comes. Walk by his side. We are always living somewhere in our own consciousness, aren't we? All we ever experience, really, all we ever experience is our own consciousness. And we're always somewhere, aren't we? There's always some little story going on in our minds about who I am and what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And that's our free will. We can be intruded upon profoundly in the physical world in all sorts of ways. There's a remarkable book by a man named Viktor Frankl, who at the age of 24, he was a Jewish psychiatrist in Austria, Vienna, I believe, and he was incarcerated in a concentration camp. And he lived through it. He lived maybe 5 years. He was incarcerated early in that period of time. And he made a profound discovery that was probably worth the horror of the experience. He discovered that absolutely everything could be taken away from you, which it was, but you always have your consciousness. Because that's all we ever actually experience, is how I relate and how I perceive and how I feel about everything else. And it is within our consciousness that Jesus walks. And we can be very philosophical about this, but it's wonderful to bring it out of the realm of the philosophical and bring it right to the realm of the personal. Jesus is a living friend, an ever-living friend, charming, funny, light-hearted, wise, companionable. You know, these are the things you have to look deeper and feel and know, and filled with that light. And what is it that we're seeking at all times? We're always seeking to experience joy and to escape from that which doesn't bring joy. Every single decision we make. But we get confused. And when we say that Jesus will redeem us, he just redeems us from that confusion. It's as simple as that. He redeems us from our own inclination to make bad choices. Bad choices in thought, bad choices in action, bad choices in feeling. He redeems us because he emanates something so much more attractive. And we're drawn not by fear or compulsion or dogma. We're drawn just because it's the only obvious choice to make. Why would I choose anything else? I had the very fortunate experience, which many of you know, that I met Swami Kriyananda. Swami Kriyananda knew Master, I knew Swami. And I met him when I was quite young, and I had the privilege of having a close friendship with him. And there was a quality of being in his company, which was the result of being there with him when he could talk and he could act. But it was an experience that happened inside of oneself. It was activated by his presence, but the experience was within oneself. Contentment, confidence, faith that, well, this world really is just for our education and entertainment, and just a willingness to be in the highest reality. And why would we choose anything else? This is the gift of the avatars. Everything else is extra. All the teaching, everything. It's the experience. It's the experience of knowing who I am. And knowing that who I am is divinely loved. Not perfect in the sense of I don't make any wrong choices, because we all make lots of wrong choices, and those wrong choices always seem like a good idea at the time, or else we wouldn't have made them. The perfection is on a very different level. The perfection is because after all of that is washed away, there is this gold of spirit, this shining light of spirit, which is the true I. And when we walk by the side of Jesus and he vibrates that light and shines that light on us, we begin to realize that it's not his light. The reason I can even see it and feel it is because it's my light. It's what really belongs to me. Swami wrote this beautiful allegory called The Land of Golden Sunshine, in which this very ordinary girl named Lisa, but she's not ordinary because she longs for a higher reality. And she's visited by the Golden Sun Man. And when the Golden Sun Man comes to her in the beautiful poetic story, at first she's totally attracted to him, uplifted in his presence. But as the light comes closer to her, the thought crosses her mind, I don't belong to this light. Even the thought crosses her mind that the light is polluted by my presence. And the story that Swami unfolds 3 times, the Sun Man comes. And by the 3rd time, Lisa simply realizes, I belong to this light. And the very sense of I begins to change. I am not all of the self-evident limitations and mistakes I've made. I mean, this is all of us, friends. Just if we could do it over, this is why we reincarnate. If I could do it over, I would. But we finally realize that the I is something very different. And that's how Christ redeems us. He pulls us out of all that isn't myself and shows me the true myself. And that's why all this time later, we are so drawn. We are so magnetized. And despite ourselves, we are so uplifted. I've told you before about a woman I saw once in a coffee shop in the summer wearing a very open dress. And she was reading an extremely well-worn copy of the Bible. And so obviously that was her dedication. And she had tattooed on her back in 4-inch letters across her shoulder, redeemed, like that. And on one level I thought, I wouldn't do that. But on another level I thought, but how extraordinary that you did. And that you are. And so will all of us be. God bless you.